The following conversation is with Aryeh Green. He is the author of My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. And in some ways, Aryeh's description of the very difficult, sometimes harrowing journey through the land of Israel works as a metaphor for what it means to overcome personal challenges as one lives one's life in this complicated and often difficult world. Also, coincidentally, this interview had taken place today, which is the day of Heroism, Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day in Jerusalem. So that was just an interesting coincidence that we got onto this topic and we just found each other. So that was kind of interesting, and it was a good conversation. It was really nice. He was very open and honest and forthcoming with his story. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. And if you enjoyed this, please follow and subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, whatever floats your boat. I'm going to leave the sponsors out on this one as they haven't changed. Links to Aryeh's book and social network accounts, as well as links to our sponsors, are in the description. Eric, I think, will be doing the timestamps for us on YouTube, which should be released by late next week. So enjoy the audio. The video is coming at you. And enjoy this one as much as I did. It was a good one. Oh, we're live now. So I have today with me Aryeh in the studio remotely over Zoom, as we all are accustomed to these days. I'm going to do a little intro here. Every now and then we meet people who are simply interesting. Everything they've done has brought them into contact with the most interesting people in the most interesting times. I have the great pleasure of introducing you to this kind of person. Aryeh Green, who has a fascinating personal history, being the descendant of one of the first Jewish families in America, who arrived in America in 1690 and went to be a successful tech business executive for more than 25 years. Made Aliyah, which I had to look up what that is, some 30 years ago, and became a major diplomatic figure of the State of Isreal, serving as a policy advisor for Natan Sharansky. I hope I'm pronouncing these things right, these guys' names. For 10 years. Yeah, okay. He did that for 10 years, becoming an expert in Middle East affairs, personally involved in meetings with top Palestinian Arab activists, and becoming a leading advocate for freedom and democracy, which he speaks professionally about on college campuses and in communities everywhere. He wrote a gripping account of a 600-mile hike along Israel's national trail, Shvil Yisra'el?
Shvil Yisra'el. That's right. You're doing very well, Remington.
God. Beginning at Dan, near the northern Lebanese border, traveling all the way to the south of Eilat. Eilat? Eilat. The book is entitled My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, and is some ways Aryeh's description of the very difficult, sometimes harrowing journey through the land of Israel. And it becomes a metaphor for what it means to overcome personal challenges as one lives one's life and is in this complicated and often difficult world. Oh, if I can speak. And Aryeh is it's wonderful to have you on the show. Like I said, I would have loved to do this in person, actually, but as it is these days, we're just going to have to resort to Zoom. So thank you very much for coming on.
It's a pleasure, Remington. Thank you for having me here. And in fact, I think our borders are opening up slowly. So who knows, relatively soon, perhaps you can jump over here and we can do it in person. We can make it down to Israel in the next few months, I think, with vaccines and corona tests and what have you. But one day.
Yeah, I was shopping at the local, the food mart here, and the salad bar was open. So I'm thinking, like, okay, that's like the first sign if the salad bar is open. Wow. Like this open, right.
The things that we used to take for granted.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the interesting part to start, I guess, would be that your family, tracing back to 1690, being one of the first Jewish families to travel or to make the trip to America to be to settle there. So since, and again, because I don't really have much of I don't have any Jewish history, so it's only just what I've gathered. But 1690 is a year that's you guys were there before the United States was the United States. So yeah, maybe we can start there and then just and then go on and see where it leads us.
That's fine. I'm happy to. It is a unique element of our family history. There's no question. Most people, when they think of Jews in America, they, and not incorrectly, presume that the families of the Jews in America today came over at some point around the turn of the century. The big waves of immigration in the early part of the 20th century, before World War II, after World War II, etc.
Yeah.
And before World War I and after World War I. That's kind of the reasonable assumption. That's true. The majority of Jews who came to America came in the last 100 years or so. The truth is that one of the misperceptions, of course, of many in the world about Judaism in general, as well as about Jews, is that we're a little bit unique in world history, because Judaism is not just a religion. It's not just a faith community or a belief system. The Jews basically started as the people of Israel, as a tribe, as the Hebrews, as the children of Abraham, the children of Isaac, the children of Jacob, who became a clan and a tribe and then a nation in the Exodus from Egypt, which of course we just celebrated with the Passover holiday this past week. And that commemoration is actually not even so much a religious commemoration as it is a national commemoration, because that really is our National Independence Day, the people of Israel becoming a nation as we wandered through the Sinai Desert and found our way to the land of Israel. And so those wanderings, of course, then were put on hold for a couple of thousand years. We had our sovereignty there and our kingdoms, and the Greeks and the Romans and others came, and eventually the Romans expelled most of the people of Israel from the land, and we ended up in this dispersion, in this diaspora around the world, many in Europe and North Africa and what have you. And it was somewhat unusual. My family's history is actually kind of normal for what we see in terms of the history of the people of Israel, the Jewish people, but very unusual with regard to the American Jewish community. My family basically was in Spain and then was expelled from Spain in 1492, went to Portugal, lived as secret Jews for a few generations, ended up in Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam to London in I guess actually it was 1720, this branch of the family, then remarried as Jews, came out of their secrecy. And then this gentleman's name is Miguel Pacheco da Silva, came from Portugal through Amsterdam to London, remarried his wife in the Bevis Marks Spanish and Portuguese Jewish synagogue in London. In 1720, we've seen the marriage contract, what's called the ketubah, there in the archives of the synagogue there. And then his son Isaac brought his family over to America in about 1740, and then had their son, whose name was Gershom Mendesatius, who was the first American-born leader of the American Jewish community. The 1690 date you mentioned is in fact on the other side of the family of who Gershom Mendesatius married. Her grandfather had come to Montreal in 1690. Again, another one of the first of the Jewish people, of the people of Israel, to come to the shores of this, the new world, as it were. As you said, well before America became the United States of America, and so it is unusual. It's a unique and very uplifting and significant part of my personal identity, having grown up in a family that wasn't very observant in terms of Jewish ritual, belief, behavior, affiliated, but in the liberal streams of Judaism, but with a very strong identity as being a member of this people that goes back 3,500 years to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses, and what have you, and my own ancestors of Gershom Mendesatius, who was actually called the Patriot Rabbi in America because he was the serving rabbi in New York of the synagogue, the largest synagogue in New York, the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish synagogue in New York.
Oh,
And when the
okay.
British, when in the Revolutionary War, when the British were encroaching on New York, Gershom Mendeseus preached a fervently pro-revolution sermon, led his congregation out of the synagogue, closed and locked the doors, took the scrolls of the Torah, the holy 5 books of Moses, with him, and fled to Connecticut in order not to be under the rule of the British. So very, very interesting kind of tidbit of history. He ended up being one of the 13 clergymen who inaugurated George Washington as president in 1792 in the Federal Building there in New York. You see, even back then, there were political payoffs for supporting certain kinds of political movements. So he supported the revolution, and in the end was one of those present at the inauguration of George Washington so many years later.
Yeah, that's a very rich history. I mean, just thinking back, first, like, there's so many things that pop in my head. The amazing record keeping, just to be able to trace back. My father has tried that too. And it becomes tricky really fast when people, are they married? Are they not married? What kind of records were kept? Usually it turns out to being like where you just end up getting like he was in jail or something. Those are like the best records kept when some type of law is broken or something like that, But yeah, gosh. So going back from all the way there, and you mentioned that that your identity, and I found that really interesting in this other interview I was watching about you, was the way that you had this kind of liberal approach to Judaism, or like a more of a pragmatic approach to the religion at the beginning, in the beginning of your life. You were living in Washington, D.C. Your family was probably just, I'm assuming, politically involved then, as everyone in Washington, D.C. is somehow involved in that machinery that's around there. And as a young boy, I guess that, if I look at my son now, I wonder how much of that really played a role in your life. But how was it growing up? Did you feel the difference when you guys moved out to San Francisco at the age of 7? Was that something that you remember?
Well, I can't say that there was a specific difference in terms of either ideology or politics or religion. My family was a Reformed Jewish family, which involved a certain style or frequency of observance. Okay. But I grew up basically in Washington and then in San Francisco with a very similar kind of dual identity, joint shared identity, very proud of our American history, very proud of our Jewish history, both on the religion side and also in terms of practice, but also in terms of our identity as part of the Jewish nation. So it didn't really change too much between Washington and San Francisco. A quick question for you, Remington: do you edit these in terms of being able to take a break, or
Sure.
are we going straight?
I can edit. Yeah, I can edit it. No problem.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is, for some reason, my battery in my computer is not. You may have seen me moving back and forth here. It's now flashing me that the computer's running out, and I don't understand. So I need to plug it in and make sure that the plug is working. So if we can edit out this last 30 seconds. And
you got it.
I'm going to try and now not worry about whether or not you can hear or see. I may have to get a different plug.
No problem. That's all good.
Because it seems to work, but then doesn't.
How many times, Eric, have we had to deal with technical issues, right? I mean, it's just like a constant thing.
It always pops up.
We've done.
I hate these. Yeah.
Take your time. It's all good.
I will. Just always frustrating. Modern technology always has something to throw at us.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go get a different plug, and I'll be right back.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, guys. Okay, we're back, and we're back in business. Something was wrong with the connectivity of that particular plug. I'm going to have to throw away. So, ready when you are, if you want to go back to recording.
Power. Got to have the power.
Yeah, really. But it's so frustrating. I'm trying to concentrate on what we're talking about, and all of a sudden I have this flashing thing. Your
Yeah.
battery's gonna die.
Yeah, that's the worst. I know the feeling too. I was just talking to Eric about it. Like we've had because we do everything live. I mean, it kind of taught me doing things live to not really care about these disruptions, because I've had people like come in the studio and I have my kid comes after school and I forgot to lock the door and he's just like, "Hey, Daddy," and he comes in.
Yeah, yep.
And it's like
But that's also part and parcel of our new kind of modern Zoom life, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's which is fine too, and it's fine also to have the human element.
Exactly. I think it's interesting for someone watching to
the
see
fact that we have to judge these things.
Yeah.
So Eric, your partner's name is Eric, so that's my English name. Funny enough, although I go by Aryeh, that was my given name is Eric.
Okay. That's an interesting story on. There's a lot of things there. Like we're kind of going off on the family history there.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to follow you, basically coming from Washington, D.C., going to San Francisco, being a 7-year-old boy, growing up in a household where you have. When you mentioned what was the style that you mentioned in your household, the type of Judaism that was practiced?
So it's called Reform.
Reform.
They're basically 3 primary streams of Judaism in modern life.
Okay.
Only developed in the last 150 years or so. Judaism was defined, I'll call it normative Judaism, in terms of its practice, belief, this whole idea of it being a civilization, which is a combination of culture, language, land, belief system, and then faith practices. So those faith practices were pretty much standard over the course of 2.5 or 3,000 years in the Enlightenment period towards the end of the 19th century. There were new theories that were developed and new movements that were created. One was called the Reform movement, which was meant to reform normative Jewish practice to be less restrictive, shall we say, more in keeping with more of a Christian concept of faith is what you believe. I resent my making that very simplistic comparison, but there's a lot of truth in it, because the Reform movement basically said we're going to relieve ourselves of the obligation, the obligatory nature of the commandments that were given in the Torah that have driven the Jewish people's religious practice over the last 2,500 years. But we're going to focus on the ethical imperatives of the prophets and still feel ourselves as part of the Jewish people. So that was the main break off from normative Judaism was the Reform movement, and then the conservative movement came to say, hold on, that was too far. Let's conserve some of this stuff and try to return to a little bit more of a traditional view of Judaism. But today, it's one of I started out in answering your question about my family in kind of bringing up this confusion that exists around the world. It's true among Jews, let alone among those who aren't familiar with the Jewish people. Yeah. This confusion that as if Judaism is somehow parallel to Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or other what we call religions, belief systems, faith communities. And Judaism is acknowledged by anthropologists and sociologists as being really more of a civilization because of these other elements. You can be a member of the Jewish people and violate every commandment in Jewish religious life, and you're still a part of the Jewish people. You're still a Jew. You can be eating a cheeseburger on Yom Kippur, the fast day, the holiest day of the year,
and still be a Jew.
The inside joke is that traditional Jews don't mix milk and meat, so they wouldn't have cheese on their cheeseburger. But it's just a way of saying you could walk into a synagogue on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year when everybody's supposed to be fasting, and be eating a cheeseburger or some shrimps or something else that's not allowed in the laws of keeping kosher, and still be recognized as a member of the Jewish people. So it's a little bit of a strange concept.
What other religion? So yeah, that's it. It's a civilization. That's why because that's actually my main beef with religion in general. Like usually this exclusion. And having that as an umbrella acceptance, it just sounds right. It's I've never really studied religion. I've always I think that's something I share similar with you. Is that I've always had kind of just a general interest in religion, and growing up in California, there's I had a very naturalistic. We didn't go to church. I was baptized Christian, but man, I had like a gold necklace that my mom gave me, and it sat in the corner my whole life. I never really. Right. But these values of love and acceptance, and the general things that all religions usually talk about, the good things, they're in there somewhere. It's just when you hear that on this non-acceptance, it just kind of turns me off, and when people tend to say this is the way, not that way. It's just an instant that doesn't work for me. Yeah. Okay. So so going in and so basically you grew up in San Francisco, and you ended up at UC Berkeley. I mean, I guess there's a lot of stuff in between there, but UC Berkeley is also a very liberal university, if I'm not mistaken.
It was the center of the free speech movement in the late 1960s, and a leadership, without question, within the free speech movement, the anti-war movement, in the civil rights movement, and what have you. And it's continued its radical activist tradition until today.
And did that kind of, in German there's a word for that, when man geprägt ist? How do you say that in English? Like, when did you have like a sense of that activism? Was that built into you through going to this school? Did you kind of come out there with that? Oh, I can see, like, when I believe in something, I'm gonna fight for it. Or was that already something that was part of your personality before that, maybe?
I do think it was really before I went to Berkeley. Berkeley for me was the result of kind of a number of coincidences. Where the details don't matter, but the California legislature had passed a law to say that if you met certain requirements, you could get the equivalency of a high school diploma, but by meeting a certain number of requirements, but without actually doing 12 years of high school.
Oh, okay.
And the law mandated government-funded institutions, which includes a university like UC Berkeley, to accept this alternative to a diploma, as if it's a diploma, for every purpose. So it's not a loophole, it's more just taking advantage of that which had been passed only recently. I ended up leaving high school at 17 and going to Berkeley because Berkeley had to accept this alternative document as if it was a diploma, and I had all the other requirements in terms of the admission tests and grades and what have you. So I ended up going to Berkeley because it was local, it was close, because they had to take me. And it's also, at that point, and still is, one of the leading universities in the world. I didn't go to it from a sense of activism. I had been active as a teenager in a number of different movements and ideologies and issues. But I did not choose Berkeley because of its activist traditions. And the truth is, although I enjoyed the time at Berkeley, I focused on a lot of kind of the stuff that I was dealing with and focused on, and I wasn't very politically active in those early years. So it's kind of ironic. People say to me, "Oh, you're a Berkeley graduate. You must be a radical leftist."
Yeah.
And then they get surprised that no, I'm actually a radical centrist.
Yeah.
So I've kind of betrayed my Berkeley roots by remaining in the political center and relatively moderate religiously as well, for my sins.
Yeah, and so it's what I'm trying to just think, like, the time of what year were you? What was like the span?
I was at Berkeley between 81 and 84.
Okay.
So they were, I guess, Reagan years. That's has its own statement in terms of what was going on in America. They were the years. In fact, I was not very focused on or connected to Israel, ironically enough. So those are the years where there were some protests against Israel and Israel's war in Lebanon against the PLO terrorism against Israel. There were a lot of things going on in campus. I was relatively uninvolved in that. I didn't really get into Israel until I got here, which is kind of, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, that's where we're going, right? So because I kind of read into this interview that it was like at the age of 21, you decided that's something that you want to do. You wanted to become a rabbi.
Well, I guess because we have enough time, I can take an extra 30 seconds and explain.
Please do.
Growing up in the Reform community as I did, I was very active in our Reform youth group, which again, it's a stream of Judaism, which is one of the three main streams there in America. It allows you to kind of pick and choose what is meaningful to you out of the myriad of traditions from our Jewish heritage in terms of ritual and festivals and prayers, going to Sabbath services or what have you. And I kind of got into that in high school and college from a Reform standpoint, a lot of the mystical stuff and meditating. And I was in at UC Berkeley, I was into kind of religious studies and comparative religion. And I did some Zen Buddhist sitting and went to Sikh temples and took classes in Gandhian methods of conflict resolution. And my first degree is in psychology. That's the kind of student I was, interested in people and in spirituality. So in the end, I did have this idea of becoming a rabbi, a Reform rabbi. Mm-hmm. And the Reform rabbinical program takes place, the first year of their program takes place in Jerusalem, in Israel. So when I applied and it was accepted, I had also applied to graduate school in international relations, which was kind of one of my first loves, at least academically. But I was accepted to the Reform rabbinical school, and that's actually what brought me to Israel. I otherwise had never had Israel on my radar. My family and community were not opposed to Israel. They weren't hostile to Israel, but they were not Zionists in the traditional term. It was not something that was really on their radar. The Reform movement has a history of being anti-Zionist and then turning around and becoming, after World War II, much more supportive of the idea of the return of the people of Israel to sovereignty in the land of Israel. But
yeah,
it really wasn't.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I just was. I was listening to that, and I had to go. I go to Wikipedia, like everybody that has no idea about what's that. So Zionism. It's both an ideology and nationalist movement among the Jewish people that espouses the reestablishment of and support for a Jewish state centered in the area roughly corresponding to Canaan.
So, right, the biblical area of what was known as Canaan. It was renamed Palestine by the Romans when they kicked out the Jews in order to kind of erase the connection with the Jews. But that land of Israel area was under obviously the sovereignty of the Jewish people from the time that Joshua came in and through to the time about 1,500, 2,000 years until the Romans expelled the Jews about 2,000 years ago. And there was always a presence of the Jews, of the people of Israel there, even in the 2,000 years that between then and now, in different places, in Jerusalem, in Tiberias, in Yavne, in Peki'in, up in the Golan and other areas. But yeah, Zionism is basically an easy way of understanding it. It is, since the early 20th century, needed a lot of isms.
Yeah, Zionism. Yeah.
So it was a way to express the modern political manifestation of what was basically the 2,000-year intention and dream and hope of the people of Israel to return to sovereignty in our ancestral homeland. And you'll notice that I use the people of Israel and the Jewish people kind of intertwined, or I kind of vacillate between them, because many people don't understand that the word Jew comes from the place called Judea, and the Jews were called Jews because they came from Judea after the dispersion. But there's no distinction between the people of Israel, who are the descendants of and members of the clan, the tribe, the nation of Israel, and the people who were specifically from one of those tribes, Judea, which was the one remaining after the dispersion of the first of the others of the 12 tribes.
Oh, okay.
So that's just a little bit of a tangent to, about nomenclature. But yeah, Zionism basically, for 2,000 years, Jews have prayed to restore the temple, to return to the promised land, the Holy Land, and to restore our sovereignty there, having been expelled by the Romans. Just as we prayed for 70 years between the fall of the first temple and the second temple back in 586 BCE, and returning then after 70 years to build the second temple after the first was destroyed. So that commitment, that concept, that prayer, that belief within Jewish traditions for 2,000 years was always constant. And it was always expressed not just in prayers 3 times a day, and every time that you eat, you have a prayer, a grace after meals, which mentions returning to Jerusalem and returning to the land of Israel, and in all of our festivals. It also was expressed throughout those two millennia, different Jewish leaders of the people of Israel who actually did come and live in Israel. Yosef Cairo came from Spain, lived in Tzfat, in the holy city of Safed, in the Galil, just overlooking the Kinneret, the Sea of the Galilee, back in the 15th century. Maimonides and the Rambam, one of the greatest sages of the Jewish people back in the 12th century, made his way to Israel. It was always part of the ethos of the Jewish people, and one of the goals that the people of Israel had and their leaders had. What was different when Herzl came around in 1894 and the beginning of the Zionist movement was because of the development of all sorts of different ideological and nationalist movements in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. This idea of a modern nation state being the expression of that 2 millennial longing to return to our land became more and more realistic and, in many eyes, important as a refuge for the Jewish people, but also as an opportunity for the people of Israel to return to an active role on the stage of history. And obviously within the context of then the early 20th century movements in the West towards what they called then self-determination, the whole issue of people, whether indigenous people or people living in a particular area who self-identify as some sort of a grouping, a national or ethnic identity, having some claim to develop an independent nation state. That was obviously all Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, the whole milieu there of both the pre-war and then interwar period. The Zionist movement as a modern national liberation movement for a people looking to return to their ancestral homeland. Obviously, that's what gave it a lot of weight. I don't know if you wanted all that detail, but
it's great. I'm just learning. I'm a sponge right now. Thank you for sharing. That was his name, Theodor Herzl. Herzl. He was the founder of the modern Zionist movement in 1896.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was also. Oh, I see that it was also. He spoke German because he named the book Der Judenstaat.
Der Judenstaat. He came from Austria.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, he lived in Austria. Yeah. And people can look up and research more. Many people are familiar with the situation and how it transpired. He was an observer at the Dreyfus trial as a journalist. Okay. Dreyfus was a Jewish officer in the French army who was stripped and imprisoned and convicted for something he didn't do, and it was amidst calls of kill the Jews or expel the Jews that Herzl was becoming aware of that even in this emancipated, enlightened new world of the late 19th century, with ideas of liberty and freedom and egalite and fraternite, that there was a real problem of Jew hatred that had not disappeared with the beginning of the development of the Enlightenment and new ideas of freedom and tolerance and acceptance, and that's what led him specifically to write that book, the Judenstaat, to advocate what basically became the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, to return to our ancestral homeland. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a rich.
How do we get into all of this, Remington?
I wanted to go down the rabbit hole of Zionism, and I think we did that. And so basically, though, because it's explaining a lot of I have this feeling of you coming to the realization that, okay, you applied like every college student. You just kind of apply, like, oh, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there, and fate has it, you get accepted to this. What's it in? What was it?
Rabbinical school.
Yeah, and the first year is in Israel direct. Is in Jerusalem.
Right. That's right. And that's how we got to this, because I said I wasn't very Zionist.
Exactly.
Up. The family was not against it, although the Reform movement was against Zionism in its early years. But it came around to the idea after World War II. But
makes sense.
I came to Israel to study in the Reform Rabbinical program with no real intention, of making a connection to this. I grew up American with these very proud of my being a ninth generation American, almost a daughter of the American Revolution. Yeah. When I came to Israel, I ended up both falling in love with the country, falling in love with the story, with the narrative, if you will, of my people, and discovering the truth, the factual elements of our connection to this land, and these things that I talk about so casually now of Jews as a civilization. Something that kind of hit me. You're walking around the streets and there are people speaking, even though to me Hebrew was still something of a foreign language. I had learned a little bit from my bar mitzvah years ago and a little bit in college, but it wasn't yet my second tongue. But hearing people from all around the world, from Morocco and Yemen and Russia and France and Australia and America and Canada, all speaking Hebrew to each other as a common language. Being in a country where your bus driver lets you off on a Friday morning and says Shabbat Shalom, wishing you a nice Sabbath, where the national calendar revolves around the Jewish calendar. So the New Year is not just some religious holiday that's kind of weird for Jews living in America that they have to take off school when nobody else does, but the New Year is celebrated on the first of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, which is according to the Jewish calendar, and that January 1st is a normal working day in Israel. I mean, all these different things, I could go on and on about the kind of, I had stars in my eyes, this idea that you could connect to our ancient people in a very modern way. And the connection between the land and the people and the history and the religion and the spirituality and the language, etc., was just embracing me. And so I decided to throw my lot in with this wonderful experience of returned sovereignty of the Jewish people in our ancient homeland. And I've never looked back. That was 36 years ago.
Yeah. Yes, that's what this is called, right? I go back to my Wikipedia. It's called Aliyah.
Right. You mentioned that word. So the word Aliyah, it's also fascinating. And I love these explorations, and I appreciate your interest, and also us having the time to kind of just, it's like sitting and chatting. I meant to have a cup of coffee with me, but I didn't have time before trying to run around and get my earphones.
If you would like to have a coffee, it's all good. Take your time.
That's okay. No, but I feel like that's what it's very much like, and I'm enjoying that. You mentioned the word Aliyah earlier, so not to go into great detail, but Hebrew itself modern Hebrew has a wonderful resonance in modern usage, which is often directly related to usage of the same language back in biblical times. So just as one example, in Judaism, in our Jewish ritual, religious, spiritual life, there are 3 times in the year that the people of Israel are called to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to bring back, when the temple stood, to bring sacrifices, whether it's just a loaf of bread to offer in the temple or meat to be offered as a sacrifice and then eaten. And the word of those pilgrimage festivals in Hebrew is Aliyah.
Okay.
Aliyah means to go up. The actual literal meaning has to do with rising up, but the concept of the Aliyah L'Regel, or the pilgrimage walk, is the walking up to Jerusalem,
up the
to
hill,
go to where the temple is, to give your offering to the temple.
Okay.
So this idea of the pilgrimage walking, going up, is the actual word used, this word Aliyah that you mentioned, which in modern Hebrew is used to describe those who choose to leave their hometown, their home country, and make Aliyah, or to come to and become citizens in Israel.
Yeah.
And the connection to the biblical meaning and the modern usage is something that it's very poignant.
And so, what is that? What you at the age of 21? That's kind of what how does that work? So basically, just going back is that's what you call making Aliyah, in that sense that
so right. So anybody can immigrate, obviously, from one country to another. That's happens all the time.
Yeah.
I believe you emigrated to Germany. You're a German citizen now.
Actually, I'm not, but
okay. But you certainly live there.
I have a residence permit, and there was definitely that process of integrating myself into Germany, for sure. Yeah.
Right. So emigration is something that happens, obviously, across the modern world. The difference between any other immigrant or emigrant and one who makes Aliyah is that it's based on this natural, historical, familial, national connection of rejoining our people in our ancestral homeland. It's not just, I'm a Brit who's moving to the south of Spain because it's more sunny there.
Right.
Or, or I'm an American moving to Germany because I have either business or family or social contacts or other reasons, all of which are of course, perfectly legitimate. But making Aliyah is given that name from that perspective, that it is a spiritual and principled move that one makes, and it's something to celebrate. It's not simply moving from one city to another or one country to another. It's something which has deep metaphysical, spiritual connotations and meaning for all of us who do so. At one point in our history, obviously after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, the issue of moving to Israel was also one of saving lives and providing a refuge for Jews who were persecuted, not just in Europe, but around the world, and bringing Jews from Yemen, from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Egypt, where there were pogroms, there were riots, and there was great discrimination, unfortunately, around the Arab and Muslim world. And as there is today, we've recently brought the last immigrants from Ethiopia, Black African Jews from Ethiopia, and also some from Uganda. So Israel still forms something of a refuge. Of course, we had 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union who made Aliyah, who came to Israel in the 90s. But the issue of Aliyah has always been one that encompasses much more than simply having a safe place for Jews if they're persecuted elsewhere. It was always an ideologically motivated concept of bringing, as I said, the people of Israel back to the stage, to the world stage, with its role of and the mission that we've always had of trying to make the world a better place, but having a modern nation state now to be able to act on that mission.
Yeah, you came back. You totally. I can listening to you. I sense that. Like when I moved to Germany, I had a different reason and different. There wasn't a metaphysical reason, but it turned into once I allowed that metaphysical transformation to happen, I enjoyed myself. It took me about 6 months to realize that, like, if I don't let it in and soak it in, I guess you were looking at it like you were already looking into it, and then I imagine just showing up there and having like you said, like people from all over the world speaking Hebrew. So it's where you really feel that civilization. It's not just a word. It's a feeling of shared, different calendar, and the bus driver, like you said, giving you. It's just you just like, for me, like I would almost compare it to like when I've never been, but I would like to go to Japan. And I've heard like when people go to Japan, it's like just dropping you in a total like another dimension, because everyone's just, it's not only the language, but like the society is so encapsulated from everything else that when you show up there, you feel like, where am I here? You know,
culture, right?
The culture is just so different, right?
But I definitely had. It's kind of interesting. So not to wax too poetic on this element, but there's no question that. When I came to Israel, as I said, I was not all that observant, although I was beginning to study to be a Reform rabbi. But I was very aware of the kind of historical ramifications of the Jewish people's dispersion and then being brought back together. And there were certain things which I just found almost moved me to tears in ways which you just. It's very hard to explain because it's not a religious concept. So one example is the people in Israel are known to be relatively gruff.
Okay.
It's not a British, oh, so sorry, society of diplomacy. People, Israelis will say to your face, "What are you, an idiot?" That's not how to do that.
Yeah.
And it turns out that a lot of studies and a lot of discussions have been had over the last 30, 40 years to try and figure out some of these things. It was pretty immediately clear to me that it's only almost because what you feel here is a sense of family. And if I said, going back to our history, that Abraham had a family and Isaac and then Jacob, and that family under Jacob became a clan and then a tribe, and then we became a nation in the Exodus from Egypt, and it was from that point on that we defined ourselves as a nation, and then came into our land and sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. But we started out as a family, and it's the familial connection that you feel almost in a way that you don't feel in any other country. What I mean is this. So the negative part of it, half jokingly, is the gruffness, the kind of casual. You don't normally say to a perfect stranger, "What are you, an idiot?" That's not the way to do it. You'd say that to your brother maybe, or your cousin. But in Israel, that is the way we talk to each other. So it's almost like family. But the positive side of that, and you can't walk down the street in Israel with a little baby in a carriage without some motherly figure saying, "Put a sweater on, she's cold."
Yeah.
You can't, in Israel, I don't think in America or Germany or elsewhere, can you imagine a situation that I actually had literally 2 days ago. Well, no, sorry, a week and a half ago. I forgot about my shoulder surgery. That's kind of warped my sense of time. Last week, I was in a park with some of my grandkids, and somebody said to me, "Would you watch my child here sitting eating something in their stroller? I have to run to the bathroom." Now, she was gone for a good 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was a perfect stranger.
Yeah.
But whether it's telling a grandmother telling a stranger's kid to tie their shoelace, or a woman telling you to put a hat on your kid in the stroller because it's cold outside, telling you how to mother or father your kid, or this kind of thing of trusting a perfect stranger to look after your 2-year-old sitting in a stroller while you go off to go to the bathroom.
That's another level.
It is. It's exactly, that's the point. It's a level. It's not just communal feelings and a good feeling because you live in a small town. It is a familial connection, which I'm sorry to say, just to put a little bit of a negative a note on it, we're in the midst of our 4th round of elections and government creation here in Israel over the last 4 years. It also explains a lot of our politics and the difficulties we have as a democracy to try and move ahead with formation of a government. Because like any other family, we're dysfunctional, we argue a lot, and everybody has 3 opinions on everything. So there's advantages and disadvantages to this miracle of the modern establishment of our sovereignty back as a family, as a nation in our ancestral homeland.
Yeah, it's very well said. I could picture that. I've had having 3 kids myself, and being I remember moments where I've had that too. I'm like carrying one daughter here and doing this there, and I've had grandmas come up to me and just be like, don't drop your child. It's like, that's one thing, but
not coming to help you and take your child. and say, here, I'll hold her for you for a minute while you get your bags together.
Yeah,
that
or
would
like
be conceivable in Germany or America or elsewhere.
Yeah, and even
happens here.
Yeah, exactly, and having that's interesting. And being able to trust a perfect stranger, almost just not even like it was a question, but it was more like, I'm doing this now. You're watching my child. I'll be back. It wasn't like, it's just, and I noticed that in the interview that you actually had with because he kind of. It's a style of communication that I appreciate because it's direct and it's honest, and so it's fantastic. But maybe if you're not ready for it and you're not expecting it, you feel like it could be kind of rude. Like he was saying, like, well, we're not done yet here. I'm going to give you. I still have this. I still want to get. He really wanted to figure out like how you went from, how you grew up in this. Are you really a Jew? Basically, is what he wanted to say, and it was kind of like, and you totally just you rolled with it, and just explained to him and his viewers exactly how you did to me, like how that happened. But I was just like, interesting how he's pushing you kind of, and it was totally accepted by you and it actually created a great conversation because. You need to have that. You need to have this. Yeah. Like if I just sat here the whole time and I am kind of that kind of guy. I have to fight against it almost to just be like yes, and it's I have a lot of respect, and so I'm here to listen, but sometimes it isn't refreshing when someone kind of pokes at it a little bit and tests the waters, because then comes the real essence of what we're trying to get at,
It's very true. The funny thing is that kind of persistence, or I wouldn't call it hostility, but honesty and just kind of being very, very straightforward. It has given Israelis over the last few decades a reputation as being rude. And it's funny, in a high-tech company that I worked for over 2 decades ago, we were bought out by a British company, and I, as a both English speaker, and also I was married at the time to a Brit, so I understood a little bit about British society and culture. I was assigned to help the Brits understand the Israelis and the Israelis understand the Brits, especially on our software development team.
Oh, gosh.
And it was very interesting because it was just classical, the kind of typical things that you might have imagined. So a British boss would say to an employee, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like that to be finished by Tuesday. And the Israeli employee misinterpreted that "if you wouldn't mind" as not being a real deadline. And I had to explain to the Israelis, when your boss says politely, "if you wouldn't mind, it would be very nice if," what he's saying is, have it on my desk by Tuesday morning. Yeah. And vice versa. I had to explain to the British software engineers that there have been books written about this, like the book called Startup Nation, about how innovation occurs in Israel in a way that it doesn't occur in other societies, in high tech in particular. And one of the answers is that there's no respect for, not that there's no respect for authority, but the point is that there's not quite as much fear of authority or rules, and there's a lot of pushing and a lot of aggressive and assertive pushing the limits. And therefore, if you're sitting around a bunch of software engineers and talking about here's a potential solution, one guy is going to say, "What are you, crazy? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard." And he doesn't mean that you're stupid, or that it's just a way of pushing things along. And you as an engineer have to understand that when an Israeli says that, he doesn't really mean
it's not personal.
That he's saying you're stupid. Yeah. And I tried to help the Israelis to understand that really they could hold back on some of those casual phrases. The problem is that Hebrew and street Hebrew, spoken Hebrew, is rife with very pithy kind of phrases like that, and so it's hard to get them out of your vocabulary.
It's interesting how languages, just the deep connection that languages have with personality and with emotions, and how if you were to say something like that, exactly like, are you stupid? Is that what this is? This ridiculous? It has nothing to do with the person, and it has to do with the fact that that we're all here working. Like, what are we doing here? We're all here to make this software better, right? So if I don't speak up and tell you that this is a bad idea, then the bad idea is going to be built in because we're all polite. And then, and in 6 months down the road, we're going to have to deal with this bug that, and so in a startup, having this hierarchy that's relatively flat, right? That's not such a, like, there might be a hierarchy organizationally, but as far as having fear for your commanding officer, or I wonder how that works in the military too. It's probably interesting.
Well, the funny thing is, again, that these are the kind of things I would highly recommend for anybody listening or watching to read the book Startup Nation by my friend Dan Senor and Saul Singer, because it's one of the things that they go into in some detail. And these are things which, as you can imagine, I guess, like in modern society, these phenomena are researched by social scientists. There's no question that the Israeli army, the Israeli Defense Forces, is a very, very different structural, cultural, bureaucratic organism than any other military force in the world. From the general ideology that officers lead from the front, and not the back, that's relatively unique. And this issue that we're talking about, that junior officers, even soldiers in the field, question their superiors. Yeah. Now, I mean, I'm not going to the extreme. You're not talking about a chaotic, free-for-all. It's not a democracy. It's an army, and there's a hierarchy, and your officers tell you what to do, and you do them. But within the context of that is the structure. There is a lot more freedom to argue back with your officers. Officers are addressed after your basic training. That's a separate issue. But otherwise, throughout the army, officers are addressed by their first name. Yeah. One of the things that outsiders don't understand is how often our prime ministers, chief of staffs, defense ministers, senior military officers are called with these nicknames. Bibi Netanyahu, Bogi Ya'alon, Bougie Herzl. These are just three that come to mind immediately. This very casual, but the reason is also that the IDF is a people's army. Our professional army is extremely small. Most of our army are reservists, meaning that your next door neighbor is senior in the tank or infantry battalion that your nephew has just been recruited to. It's just part of, so therefore there's again this familial connection which permeates not just the high tech or business sectors but also the army. So there's definitely not just permission and kind of an openness to arguing with your superiors, but there's actually encouragement of it, because that's how problems are solved. That's how challenges are met on the battlefield itself, or in preparations and making the units stronger by bringing in suggestions from down below, not just from the top echelon.
Yeah, in Germany we have this thing. Like, I noticed it, especially now with the pandemic. You can feel that there's all this frustration, and Germans, they complain, but they do it. Right? They they hate the fact that, like, from the top down, everything's being told and you have to do this and that. They hate it, but they do it anyway. Right. And they don't, and they complain amongst each other, and they'll sit there and they'll say the world this is so terrible, blah blah blah. But then they go out and then they yell at someone for not wearing a mask. It's just it's an interesting thing that I saw here. In the States, it's a kind of a different thing, right? I mean, you have both. You have it's a mix of everything there. But it's an interesting perspective to hear from, especially on the military level, that that you have this openness of communication, which allows, probably, like you said in the book. I'll check it out. It sounds interesting. Startup Nation. I wonder what his approach was to what you mentioned, the downside of that. Like, when you have this open communication, everybody can go. Then it's like, well, now the floodgates are open. So now, does that kind of check the progress that we could possibly have, at least politically? I mean, politically, it's just a huge topic in general, and politics in itself are just so complicated, right?
Yeah.
But you have experience in that. You were for 10 years. You sat alongside. You were a policy advisor in the Israeli government. So
well, I was for 10 years. I was an advisor to Natan Sharansky, who was a senior figure in Israeli politics and society for many years. So when we were in the prime minister's office, I worked with him on a number of different areas and issues, and definitely that's another area where you'd be surprised how easy it is to disagree with who basically is your senior. I definitely found, and this is true throughout my life. I have a master's in international relations. I've done a lot of research into decision making in government bodies, especially in America. The culture of what I guess in Britain there was that great series called Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister. The culture of acquiescing to senior authority figures, especially within the political realm, which unfortunately is still, I think, a challenge in America and in other Western nations. I think it too much permeates our Western political culture of not being able to stand up and offer alternative views to political leaders.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not referring to any particular either president or prime minister. It's
just in general,
across
right?
the board.
Yeah, for sure.
But in Israel, there again, the actual purposeful and intentional seeking out of other opinions and other perspectives is something I think that is somewhat unusual in terms of Western democracies.
Yeah, and it's like it always seems like when an organization is running by these rules, they're just more effective. I think, like when I think of, I'm a big Elon Musk fan. I follow a lot of what he does, and when I think of him, he's the officer in the front of the field. You know, he's the guy putting 60 hours a week. He'll if he needs to put the doors on the cars to get him out, he's on the floor, So I think that's how and building a team and all of these other aspects of being a leader. Some people are made to be leaders. Some people can learn it. Some people are thrown into it and you find out if it's going to work or not. But having that principle of putting yourself out there first tends to motivate the people behind you, right? Because it's like, well, if he's doing it, then we're good. If he's just sitting back with his arms back and saying, go there, it's kind of like, it's not authentic, right?
Very much so. And in fact, my day job today, we haven't talked really much about the book or about the renewable energy the projects that we're bringing to Africa. But the connection I'm making here is that one of the things that excites our investors and new investors in our company so much is how many investors have already put their funds into our projects, into our company, and the fact that the heads of the company are all in. And it's like the officer leading from the front. If you're thinking of investing in the company and you know that all 4 senior managers have basically invested, their lives, their money, their time, their hours, and they have literally a vested interest in the success of the company, then you're more willing to follow them, like you are more willing to follow an officer who says, after me, going into battle, than you are somebody who's sitting back there and saying, you go, I'll control things here from behind the battle lines.
Let's get into that. So the book that you wrote, let's get into that. You did a 600-mile hike. This is a trail in Israel that goes from the northern part of Israel all the way down to the south.
It does. Here, I can show you a picture.
Yeah.
If you want.
Yeah, exactly.
I can share my screen and show you a picture of. Let's just get to the right one. The map of the trail itself.
How old were you when you started that? if I may ask, I'm just trying to get a timeline.
Of course, you may ask. I was 51.
Okay.
When I did the trail, this is the Israel National Trail. It's about actually more like 700, almost 800 miles now, because they keep adding bits to it. But it goes from the top of the country on the border with Lebanon, as you said, down to the bottom on the tips of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Eilat, down here in Eilat. And it goes up through the Negev desert, and then up to the hills around Jerusalem and along the coast, and then through the Galilee by the Kinneret, the Sea of the Galilee, and then up to the north. So yeah, I did it when I was 58.
Right on. Gosh, how did you prepare for that?
Well, I did it. I was going to show you a.
Yeah, please do.
You want to walk along with me a little bit?
Yeah, let's walk along a bit. I'll explain it for the people listening, maybe. A little bit of wind.
I like to share the feeling of being out there in the desert. This is a video I took maybe the third day of the.
I guess I go that way.
On the hike, just there at the. Oops, get to the. There we go. I was going to look for you for another. Here we go. So I was 51 years old. I did it all alone, with a 50-pound pack on my back, 25-kilo pack on my back, in one go, basically 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Yeah, 8 weeks of hiking, 42 days of hiking, because I didn't hike on the Jewish Sabbath, on the Shabbat. And
nice.
What can I say? It was a transformative experience. I meditated on mountaintops and cried in dry creek beds, looked up to the sky, looked down at the ground again, and looked back to see how far I'd come, and learned quite a few lessons about humanity and about meeting personal challenges along the way. It was quite an experience.
Being alone for that long, I can imagine having. Did you come in contact with? I mean, I'm sure you did. There's other people up every now and then, right? You weren't completely isolated, but for the most part, right? For 90% of that, it was just you and your bag, huh?
Yeah. In fact, when I started to write my book, I had never really planned on writing a book, but I had made some journal entries in the midst of the hike. And looking back over it, what I discovered was that there were 12 days of the hike where I literally didn't see a single soul.
Yeah.
From morning till night.
12 days.
Most of the other days, you would run into other hikers on the trail, have some, small interactions, or stay at a trail angel, which is an unusual phenomenon just in Israel, where people open their houses. Going back to our discussion about the familial nature of the people of Israel and the citizens of Israel, where hikers are welcomed in to stay overnight and have a shower, given a bed and some food, what have you. But yeah, there were most of the days I was hiking alone. There were only 2 days out of the course of the entire 42 days of hiking that I actually hiked with somebody. Mm-hmm. For the length of time, for a half a day or 2 days.
How was how was that experience after hopefully it was like a nice, you never know what partner you're going to have. One of these people that just talks your ear off for 2 days. You're like, God, please just let me be alone again on the trail.
Well, so now you're picking up on, some of the reasons that I was very happy to be hiking alone. Because obviously that gives you a time for reflection, contemplation, and I had a lot of reason to want to give thought to life and goals and what have you. So yeah, it was much more preferable to me to be hiking alone than with other people.
I mean, gosh, I just noticed that in my own life. If I just have a day, I mean, I almost feel guilty. Just taking a day out, take a day, and I mean, it's probably because we have 3 young kids and stuff, but sure. It's but if you don't feel guilty and you do just go in and be in the moment, just even for a long weekend, and you come back and you have a different perspective. You just come back at things. So 8 weeks, 12 days not seeing the soul. I had a friend that moved into the forest. He said, I'm gone. He took off. And I remember
Yeah.
We had to help him for his, like we supplied his we had like a rat, he needed rations. So I remember like my job one day was to like help him. We got all these buckets from the Home Depot and filled them up with rice and made them so that he could have, over the winter, he could have his storage. He was living in Big Sur, which is a really like a tropical forest basically. So even in the winter,
Right.
it's a good place to be. And
Right.
his name was Don. And I remember driving him down from like Sacramento down to Big Sur. It was, 2.5-3 hour drive. And there wasn't much. I mean, I was kind of like the latest Tom Cruise movie. I didn't really have like and he didn't say a word. And I just remember feeling so uncomfortable with this guy in the car. We had like a little tiny Toyota pickup, and I was sitting next to him. I'm just like, yeah, Don. So he's like, oh, Remington, I like you. You're a nice guy. But that was about it. Like that was about the 3.5 hour drive. He said to me, and it's just, I was amazed at that. I never forget how centered he was as a human, probably because of his time alone in the forest.
I'm sure that's true. And I look for that actually now periodically to kind of regain some of those feelings and some of that kind of contemplative spirit, being able to focus inward and also to be able to focus on our priorities. Here's a picture of me on the top of one of the hardest days of the climb, where I was definitely focused only on myself. I'm not falling or breaking my leg or something.
Right. So that's the aspect that we haven't even touched on. So the physical demands are how was that? I mean, so regardless of age, I think it doesn't matter these days. Really, like if you're not out hiking for 8 weeks at a time, your body's got to take. There's going to be an acclimation process, no matter how fit you are, and unless you're doing that kind of stuff all the time, right?
You're absolutely right. There's no question that there's. I had to do some preparations beforehand. I was in pretty good shape. I out on my bike maybe 2-3 times a week for a few decades leading up to this.
Okay.
But I'd done some hiking in the country and hiking in California and what have you. But I took a little bit of time to prepare to make sure that I could deal with this 50-pound pack on my back.
Yeah.
And I got stronger as the weeks went on. Also, there's no question. I was going to try and patent here's a picture of me walking through a forest in the northern Negev.
That looks nice and green. From all the pictures, that's the first green I've seen.
Right. Well, right. This was the transition. There we go.
He got a good pace going on there.
Yeah. This is the transition point between the south, the Negev desert, and moving into the Jerusalem hills. Geographical transition, but also transition for me in terms of moving ahead from not just desert to forests, but also moving to thoughts of acceptance and gratitude as I moved closer to my home, which was actually there right in this area in the middle, near Jerusalem. So yeah, there's a physical element to it, but once you get into it, I was going to patent a new diet. I was going to call it the Israel Trail diet. Lose 8 kilos in 8 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
That's basically what happened to me over the course of the trip.
This is something that since I've never been there, geographically it reminds me now, where you see that it's getting green now you're like, okay, this is why they call it the cradle of civilization, right? Like there's you're getting into this place where it's like, this is where we came from. Well,
it's an interesting question. I don't know. I'll skip through a few photos which are not as relevant. I think actually that the cradle of civilization term comes from really an understanding of the pre-monolithic monotheistic religions having been born from this area, not so much of the geography and the Fertile Crescent in terms of the environment, but there's no question that people have some interesting preconceived notions of what the Holy Land, what Israel looks like, and sometimes I think these are just funny from a celebration that we had in the midst of the hike.
Yeah. Well deserved.
Yeah, exactly. people think of Israel as all desert.
Yeah.
And the idea that here you're looking, for instance, to the snow-covered Golan, Mount Hermon in the Golan, that the north of Israel is covered in forest. It's not, Northern California. It's not that expansiveness, and you're not talking about giant redwoods. But as you'll see in some of these photos, these are up north near the Lebanon border in the Galilee. Israel's not just all desert and camels.
Oh, okay. So this is more up north. Okay, it makes sense. I kind of had it wrong in my head that as you were going more south, it got green, but it's actually this
right.
is
No.
Okay.
I actually jumped up north in the middle. I came from the south, from the tip of the Red Sea in Eilat. I came up north towards Jerusalem, and then when I got to Jerusalem, my son drove me up north, and then I took a bus and a cab and what have you, and ended up on the border with Lebanon, in order to then move south.
I get it.
Along these paths. And this is, for instance, the Hula Valley, which is there up in the very, very far north of the country.
Cool.
And so it's a whole different dynamic, it's a whole different geographical, geological experience.
Yeah, so then as you so towards the end of the trip, basically you did the second half from the north to the south, and ending in Jerusalem again.
That's right. Well, ending in my hometown, which is near Jerusalem.
Yeah, okay.
Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to end by walking home.
Yeah.
Not ending somewhere and then getting in the car and return home.
Beautiful.
This is just another nice example of the quiet. This is one of those days where I literally didn't bump into another soul this is called the Baram Forest in the north, just on the border with Lebanon. And you see how it kind of looks a little bit like Northern California.
It does.
Or really. Switzerland at times, depending on where you are.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm just having fun as we talk, going through some more photos.
I'm sure just every time you look at these pictures, you just have these memories of. I mean, that's such an experience, just having so much time out there.
It's really true.
Oh, that looks like a natural little.
That was an ancient wine press. I make wine as a hobby.
Cool.
For like 20 years. So I came across these 2,000-year-old wine presses, and always had to try and figure out where they're from, who they're from. And it's another amazing thing about hiking the Israel Trail as opposed to the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail or other Machu Picchu in South America. There's a lot of amazing treks in the world, but this, and whether you're a Jew or whether you're a believing Christian or Muslim or even not, the connection that I had as a Jew to to walking the land of our ancestors was phenomenal. I would come across a threshing floor or a grape pressing floor like that one, and recognize that 2,000 years ago there were people here pressing grapes, getting ready for the Sabbath, and it goes much beyond that. Ritual baths in ancient houses, finding evidence of vineyards going back thousands of years. Just a real interesting, different kind of a trek. Yes, we had these physical challenges like falling off cliffs.
Yeah.
Yes, but we also I stumbled over the grave burial place of the prophet Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, the one, swords and plowshares. His words are pasted on the United Nations entry plaza about beating swords into plowshares from the book of Isaiah. So to find the prophet Isaiah, I said Elijah and misspoke. The tomb of the prophet Isaiah in the middle of a hill in the middle of the north of Israel was just phenomenal. It's a whole different experience hiking the Israel Trail than it is hiking the Appalachian Trail. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Did you ever do that one too, or just the Appalachian Trail? I mean, I've heard of it.
I've hiked a little bit in various places in America.
Yeah.
Try and turn the sound down. I've actually never hiked. I've hiked one little bit of the Appalachian Trail and a little bit of the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah, but it just doesn't have the history. I mean, you can't. The 2,000-year history is it's just like you can't.
Exactly.
Oh, there's a.
Exactly. It's a whole different. I mean, there are amazing hikes in the world. There's amazing beauty in the world, and it's obviously something that we all can celebrate and enjoy. But it's a much different experience when you're hiking along the lands, literally that your ancestors walked. I felt that back in the desert, even much more strongly. Like the wandering of the children of Israel in the desert spoke to me as I walked through the desert in the first few weeks of my trek.
Yeah, you feel it in your bones, basically. Like,
you really do.
And as far as nutrition and food and everything, how did you deal with that? Did you have like just Cliff Bars with you, or did you? I mean, every now and then you could find, like you said, you probably were taken in and had like some food or restaurants in different when you're close to cities, huh? But
right. Well, I carried on my pack. You can see here I also carried a small mini guitar.
Yeah.
For the last 4 weeks of the trip, but I carried in my pack basically quinoa and oatmeal and granola bars and hard vegetables like carrots and I'm a vegetarian, so I didn't carry meat with me, but I did occasionally have a can of tuna. And otherwise, I would stop and stock up every few days, depending on where I was. In the desert, it's much more difficult.
Yeah.
You actually have to stop and make sure that you're planning well, because you can go 2 or 3 days without coming across water or resupply. So sometimes you have to bury. I buried some water and food in different places when I was down in the south. Up north, it's much easier to just pass by a small, it's a small village or a town or even a gas station, which will be able to give you, some of your basic requirements.
No, wow, what a interesting. So how does that link together with what you mentioned before? We talked about the book about the investments or about the projects that you're currently involved in.
Well, actually, the only connection between the book and that is that at the end of my trek, I made some decisions about my life. One of the lessons I learned was the importance of what Viktor Frankl says in his book, Man's Search of Meaning, the importance of having a sense of goal and purpose and what have you. And so I made some decisions actually in this period that we're looking at. These pictures here is the last few days of the trek, where I wrote in my journal some real specific decisions of what I wanted to do next with my life. One of them was not to let this camel to grab my friend Yaakov's beard, of course.
Going straight for it there.
One of them was to change careers, was to move back into the kind of job that I felt was going to be more fulfilling, because it would enable me to do more good for the world. And I joined my friend Yosef in this renewable energy company building solar fields for Africa.
Okay.
And that was the connection with the trek. Is very much that decision came out of the contemplative last few weeks on the hike, where I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do now once I get home from this hike? I'm divorced, I'm alone, I want to continue to make my life meaningful. And one of those decisions was I decided to basically move over and full-time work for this renewable energy platform for Africa. And so that's kind of the main connection.
That's interesting that but that's just such a clear decision in that moment, right? Like a decision made after being alone for so long. It's almost how did it come up very naturally eventually, right? Or how did it feel like when you came to that realization? You're like, oh yeah, there's no, I guess you're not questioning it anymore,
No, not at all. Although we're coming to the topic a little bit from the end of the story rather than the beginning, and that's really obviously okay. But the whole reason I took this trek was because I found myself in the situation of having been divorced, not something that I had looked for, not my decision, not my choice.
Wow.
And that basically had turned my world upside down. And having finalized the divorce, I was out on the trail to kind of, figure out what the heck I'm doing with my life. So within the context of the other lessons that I learned on the trail, issues of humility and gratitude and acceptance of these sorts of things that happen in your life. One of if you like that,
You
I thought
effing
you'd
did
like
it.
that. Yeah, well, that was my. Yeah, I'll play the video of me coming home just for fun as kind of
Yeah.
a wrap up. But so getting to the point there towards the end of the trail, having reached a level of acceptance with a great sense of humility and with a lot of appreciation and gratitude for all the blessings in my life, and actually reaching a level of forgiveness of my former wife and God and myself and the world and fate for bringing me to this situation, which I had found myself in, unhappy, miserable, suffering, angry, resentful at the divorce.
Yeah.
I then got to a point with all of that work having been done to focus on what kind of goals and objectives that I wanted to set for myself. So obviously I had personal goals, and I had familial goals, and I had communal goals, and then I had my professional goals, which were probably the easiest to come to, because this was a project that I've been helping my friend Yosef move ahead with already for a few years. And so for me, the idea of doing well by doing good, which is a kind of a term in impact investment, which refers to, yes, make your profits, but try and make the world a better place as you're doing it, was part of the same kind of the same philosophy. And therefore it was easy for me to make that choice to make that professional career move.
That's interesting. Yeah, like the fact that the way that you put it is interesting, because it was like that decision was actually the easiest, and that realization was the easiest. All of these ones before it had, but they were much harder. I can't imagine. Just I'm in a relationship, and I've been with my wife and moved to Germany, and we have 3 kids, and just going through that scenario is not fun. Just to think about what would happen if, and then when it really is there, it does it. I can imagine it threw everything on its head. Yeah.
It really did. And of course, that's why in the book itself, although it's a description of the hike and the physical hike, the fact that I learned these lessons also from the physical hike, but then had repercussions for my ability to heal from the divorce. There's a lot more time and attention paid to those earlier lessons. The final lesson about having goals and having a purpose in life to give your life meaning, like Frankl says, that was a little bit easier and a little bit more intuitive once I'd already done the work of overcoming the issues of forgiveness and getting rid of my resentment and anger and putting the pain behind me. No question.
Frankl is just a crazy story. When I remember first listening I was in Las Vegas at the time. I was having a hard time myself, just being alone and not meeting anybody that was really, I was just like, there was no really women out there. I was always kind of a guy that wanted to have a relationship, and I was one of these guys, and in Las Vegas, people there, the relationships were just very, I was pretty alone, and I remember just thinking to myself, like, God, and I found Tony Robbins, and it's such a cliche, this guy, right? The life coach, it's going to get you out of it. And I remember literally hypnotizing myself, like having like my computer screen in front of my bed and having like this visualization that Windows used to have back in the day when it would just be in its and he's talking about the scorpion and the frog, and then he talks about Viktor Frankl. I'll never forget this and to this day, I mean, Viktor
Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, that was something that actually I had studied back when I was studying psychology, and only after the trek, when I started to write my book, did I go back and read it, because there were so many elements of his theories and his approach to life, which I was thinking about as I was walking in that last week. And it is very, very powerful, both how he came to the understanding and the theories that he developed about how important it is for all of us to have real goals to work for, to make our life worth living, to make our life meaningful. No question.
I mean, I remember hearing that he motivated prison guards. Like, hey, this guy's sitting over there, basically stripped of everything, and he still had some type of energy that even the prison guards saw him as a motivating figure in the concentration camps. It's insane.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the context is so very important. That's what makes his book, his theories, and his approach so very powerful, because it's all based on his experiences as a concentration camp inmate in a number of camps and his observations of others. And however stark and harsh it sounds, the way that we kind of can casually refer to it, he, having gone through it and researched it and developed a whole theory of what he calls logotherapy based on it, is very, very explicit that people who had a goal to live for were more likely to survive the horrors of the Holocaust. And, one doesn't want to, and one can't make any comparison between suffering of person A and suffering of person B, and whether it's physical or emotional, and there's no need to make those comparisons. Everybody suffers pain. Everybody perceives pain, and his bottom line point for anybody suffering is that if you have a reason to live, you're more likely to survive and get through it. Was a profound discovery, which, although it sounds intuitive, was never really recognized in the world of psychotherapy, and because of his experience in the Holocaust, really made a tremendous contribution, I think, to the world of therapy, the world over. And by the way, I don't know when we're going to broadcast this conversation we're having, Remington, but it happens to be today in Israel is the Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Oh, really?
Completely coincidentally. Literally an hour before we started, we had our siren. We have an annual Memorial Day. It includes a siren throughout the country where we stand for a moment of silence to remember the victims of the Holocaust. And there are ceremonies in schools and communities throughout the day. There's a national ceremony that was last night at the Holocaust Memorial and Commemoration Authority, government leaders and what have you. So it's very appropriate that we've come around to that as one of the elements of our conversation here on Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel.
Yeah, it's well, we're live, so I mean, in that sense, we're right on time. I mean, that's the.
I didn't even realize we're live. I thought we were recording.
Yeah, so in that sense, like, I mean, I will go back for when we release this, I will go back and cut it and make it.
Okay.
But just what a coincidence, right? Because that wasn't planned at all today.
It would not have come up, and if it wasn't for the flow of our conversation and the issues that we're dealing with and your own familiarity, then it wouldn't have come up. So it just goes to show there are no coincidences in this world. I believe that. I
feel like that too. Like I love when things like that work out, and I feel like that means that I'm open to it, or there's the energy is somehow there's some type of flow there. I feel like that the more that you don't fight it, and maybe it's nice to recognize it what it is. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Maybe I'm on to kind of go down that whole. I can just speak from my own experience, and you can basically just give me another. Yeah, it's just a perspective as a for you're living in the heart of the civilization that from your forefathers and for me, like growing up and just learning about the Holocaust, and it was as simple as putting on the movie Schindler's List in high school and trying to we analyzed it in a historical perspective of why the little girl had to have the red dress and everything else was black and white, and just the images alone just stick with you forever. And that's the point of the film, and it was something that stuck with me. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but today is a good day to think about it. And you see things, I guess, as someone that doesn't have such an emotional connection to this civilization. you see it as an outside thing, or you hear, okay, hashtag, Day of Remembrance, and then it's kind of like it's the next thing. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I guess I'm just talking about my own experience, and dealing with it as an outsider and having that emotional connection. It just must be living in Jerusalem must be just much. Yeah, it's such a sad day, really.
Well, it's true. It's the reason I'm hesitating is because there's been a real move in Israel since, I would say, the 1960s to create something much more, I think, deep and meaningful than simply having a Memorial Day, which is sad with regard to the Holocaust. Partially because it is so tremendously, I would say, difficult, if not impossible, to really grasp the enormity of the evil that was perpetrated. Partially because it's important to make things personal. Partially because it's important to take a commemoration like this and a Memorial Day and have some use to be able to look forward and look beyond the pain. There are all sorts of things that have been created in order to make the day much more than just a sad day, which is part of it. Obviously, recognizing the enormity of the cruelty and the sadness and the loss is a very big part of it. But other parts of it are also important too. So one element of the day here in Israel, as it's commemorated, is commemorating the heroes of the uprisings, in the Warsaw Uprising and others, and resistance in general within the Jewish community, without the Jewish community. Another way is recognizing what are called the righteous of the Gentiles, righteous among the Gentiles, the many Christians and Muslims who made efforts to save lives of Jews within the context of the Holocaust. A lot of effort is made to use it as an educational springboard to address issues of hatred, intolerance, racism, etc. in our modern society. So there's a lot beyond just a day of sadness. There's an important element of the sadness in the commemoration. But it's not a coincidence that Yom HaShoah is placed as it is. That's the Hebrew term for Holocaust Memorial Day, as it is today, a week before we have our annual also National Independence celebration, our Independence Day. And our Independence Day is, I think, unusually in Western nations, immediately preceded by Memorial Day for fallen soldiers. And these things are all intertwined. So we have this tremendously sad Memorial Day for all of the thousands of soldiers that have died defending Israel, defending the Jewish people next week. And then we move immediately and transition into a celebration of Israel Independence Day. But that is purposeful because these people died for a reason. And our recognition of their sacrifice is obviously sad and poignant, and it's terrible, and it's difficult, especially for the families who've lost individuals close to them. And then we come around to our other conversation about how in Israel everybody's family. So there's a lot of truth to that too. Everybody in Israel knows somebody who was killed in a terrorist attack or hurt in a terrorist attack, or knows somebody who knows somebody, or knows somebody who has a family member who died in the Lebanon War or the Yom Kippur War, or what have you. So it is familial. But the movement to the celebration also gives meaning to the sacrifice. And so coming back to Israel's Holocaust Day commemoration, that also plays a piece. You know, the fact that we're here in Israel, that we're creating a vibrant, modern, democratic, multicultural, Jewish and non-Jewish population, nation state, to bring the people of Israel back to an active role in the world stage, and not just as a passive victim, as was 70, 80 years ago. That's also part of the way that we commemorate the Holocaust, not just out of sadness.
Fantastic! What a great way to take that and use it as a way to empower.
Very, very much so.
And I can really relate to that. I just found like a new style of meditation, and it had to do with Stoics and Stoicism. and how
Really?
they use negative visualization. And I've always been afraid of it. I've always had kind of kept my, like, I just without knowing what to call it, I always wanted to be, I'm always just positive visualization, only positive energy. And the Stoics introduced something to me like, doing that, thinking about, having that memorial and having that time of remembrance makes that celebration, it makes it more, you can taste it. It's just more, I don't know how the right word for it. I get tangible. It's just more
tangible, definitely, and accessible. And our schools. My daughter is a teacher in a special school for girls in Jerusalem. And before we started our conversation, I participated via Zoom in her classroom's ceremony, and it was very moving. Partially because of that. Partially because some of the themes of remembrance is also to remember and not forget. Also to commit ourselves to living a vibrant and full life here in Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, having returned to this sovereignty in our ancestral homeland, which means that we both have the ability to defend ourselves, to ensure that such a thing would never happen again, but also that we have the ability to make our lives meaningful and contribute to the world. And that's all part of the same kind of themes coming out of the Holocaust Memorial Day.
How old were the kids in the class?
13, I think her students are. 13.
Cool.
Or I want to share with you one last thing. This is more fun than funny, not Holocaust related, but yes, definitely what you're about to see. I'm going to now connect a few dots.
Okay, cool. I'm ready.
So in Yad Vashem, which is the name taken from a biblical phrase of the Holocaust Commemoration and Memorial Center in Jerusalem, when they rebuilt one of the main buildings, one of the things they did was they had physically, as you as a participant walking through, of course, there are terrible images and photos and videos and descriptions of the destruction of European Jewry. But after this very difficult 3-4 hour experience, including there's a special hall for all the million children who were murdered in the Holocaust, and there's a whole physical kind of a valley where the names of communities that were destroyed are on rocks that you walk through, and you get a real physical feel for what we've lost. The children's memorial is a million candles lit in a dark room, and it's just a lot of physical, experiential elements, not just intellectual reading about numbers. And so the end result of this, physically in terms of the architecture, is you walk out of the building into an open balcony looking over the green of the Jerusalem forest. And there's no question that the feeling that was intended and that is experienced is you're walking from death into life. You're walking from the horrors of the Holocaust out into the miracle of the modern nation state of Israel, which is literally blooming, burgeoning green forest, and in the distance the modern city and neighbors of Jerusalem. Why am I sharing that with you now? Because what I'm going to share with you, after my divorce and the pain and the suffering that I experienced and the difficulties of the trek and the lessons that I learned, I walked home. As I mentioned, that was my homecoming. I had some friends who met me, and my kids met me as I began to walk home. And here's what they did, which is fun and funny, but the end of my journey.
Hey, she's coming.
They put a red ribbon for me to run
Nice.
through.
Hey, no, wait, I'm coming around, wait.
It's got to get it from the other angle when you go through the...
Dad, you have to run through, wait.
Oh, yeah, nice. Eye of the tiger.
And he falls and breaks his...
So I thought you might appreciate that. And that's where this sign comes from, which my daughter Moria welcoming me home from a Jason Mraz song. She put that up to
Fantastic.
celebrate the homecoming.
For people listening, it says you effing did it. Like they spelt it without the UCK, but they made the point.
Yeah, they made the point. So that's
awesome.
That's kind of the end of my story, or the beginning of the next chapter of my story, if you will.
Fantastic. Yeah. Aryeh, thank you very much for sharing. I think that's actually just a fantastic way to end this conversation. I probably could just keep on digging your brain. I mean, there's so much experience there. I think I would love to circle around and find the time to experience. Even I've never been to Israel, never been to Jerusalem. Maybe it would make sense to kind of go there, show up there for a couple of days, and just get a feeling for it, and then meet you or something like that. If that somehow could work, and then I could share the emotion that I feel. You get that. Like I remember just showing up to Germany or anywhere, whenever you travel out of your comfort zone, you just it always takes. I remember like sometimes it takes a couple of weeks to really to work through all of the different feelings you get when you show up in different places, different cultures. Yeah,
that's definitely true. But really, Remington, I would be delighted to welcome you for a visit. You should come. It's worthwhile to come to visit. I would say I'm not a one-man tourist board, but I definitely think it's a worthwhile visit for anybody to come to Israel with everything that it has to offer. But if you do come, I would be delighted to welcome you here to watch a sunset from my balcony and sip on some of my homemade wine, or even to walk with you for a few hours on parts of the Israel Trail, because you can do that. You can walk an hour here or a day there. You don't have to do the entire 8 weeks, 1,000 kilometers, with a 25 kilo pack on your back. That you don't have to do. You can still enjoy it just in the day hike.
Yeah, very good. We want to hang around after we get offline, just so that I can just kind of say a couple words offline with you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Sometimes I forget to say that, and then we hang up, and I'm like, oh no, come back.
Sure, I'm happy to hang around. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah.
And anybody who's looking for information about the book, by the way, the website is www.myisraeltrail.com. So it's pretty easy to find, and you can also email me and connect with me through the website if there's interest.
Yeah,
also
for sure.
On Amazon and Book Depository, etc.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put a whole bunch of links in the description too of the video and on the
great.
podcast, so that people can find. I'm gonna read it myself. I got to check it up. I didn't make time, unfortunately, before we got online. But now, I mean, you've intrigued me, so obviously.
I'm happy. I'm happy to stay online.
All right.
And we can chat a bit more.
All right. We'll say goodbye to the folks. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.